I heard Scott say on Metal Shop on WNEW right before State of Euphoria was out that the title came from how happy the band was with the career momentum touring behind Among the Living. What do you remember about where you were at personally when you were starting to make State of Euphoria?
That was the mindset, and I actually came up with that title because of there was two reasons for it. Me thinking all the time of how we could tie it in with, T-shirts and touring and stuff like that. My immediate thing was state of, and then we would put the states, like the state of, California, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Illinois, stuff like that. And plus, it was, you have to understand, for us, Among the Living was a very, it was like a whirlwind at that time, because we've been, that lineup was 2 years old.
Right.
At the time, we were recording and, writing and recording Among the Living. So we were like 2 years old. And the ideas that were coming out were very, adventurous, and just like, this is exactly the music that I wanted to make. I always dreamt of making. So Among the Living was a complete surprise that it was so well received. And now we were being looked at as a real fucking band, you know what I mean? A real metal band. And then I'm the Man came out after that, and that was even bigger. So we were just kind of like, we couldn't even watch it happen because we were in the middle of it. You know what I mean? We were in the eye. So it was amazing and everything. And then that led to the title and the whole vibe of State of Euphoria.
Right. So that lines up with what Scott said. I remember Scott on that show. Obviously, you remember that. You got to remember that show, right? Metal Shop.
Yeah, of course.
He said, I know it sounds corny, but we were just very, very happy. So it sounds like the mood in the band was really high, and presumably that lineup was still getting along personally. Like, none of the cracks had started to show yet by that point, right?
I mean, I wouldn't say that they were. I mean, things were showing in '85, but we just kept it together. That's all. When you start to live with people, you start to see their idiosyncrasies, and wow, this guy is the way he is because that's just the way he's grown up. Now he's thrusted into this band of brothers, and you can see how his personality may clash with that guy's personality. So you just started to see things like that,
Yeah, because it always seemed when you guys would do like group interviews on MTV or whatever that the vibe was always, you guys were always laughing and joking.
It was, and that's the truth. It really was like that. I would say 80% of the time. It wasn't until like other people would get involved that things would get a little weird. But when it was just us, it was good.
And so some of that is documented. The reissue comes out with a bonus disc of rough rehearsal recordings.
It's basically, it's some like just demos that I had, just riffs. And then that goes into like like when I would bring a song or stuff into rehearsal, and I would show everybody, and then we would start to play it, and it goes through that stage. It's the best way I can put this is kind of like the way the Beatles did that anthology, where you see it take stages, and you see the progression of the song. That's exactly how I intended it to be.
Right. It starts with you humming the main hook, like the cello. Well, it's the main hook from Be All End All into your answering machine or whatever, or tape recorder or whatever. Something that I think like any musician who's ever had an idea can relate to that, of like back when you used to have to call your own answering machine or call your own voicemail, right?
Yeah, man. Technology wasn't there yet,
So it starts with that, and then it goes through like every song, you guys workshopping the songs in rehearsal, and for like not everybody is there for all of it, but a lot of it does have you, Scott, Frank, and Danny.
Yeah. Yep.
So you've been the primary like engine of the band musically, and I was surprised because kind of always pictured that it was you and Scott who would lay the foundation in working out the songs. So there's a lot of participation from Frank and Dan in like talking about structure and going into sections and repeat chorus here. There's a lot of like not arguing, but things bands do. Could you talk a little bit about that, about how you guys at that time were arranging things? Like who had their hands, how much each person put into it? I mean, I know the vocals came later, but I'm talking specifically about between you and Scott and Frank and Dan Spitz.
I mean, basically, I had an idea in my head of how I wanted the song to be, and I would say that back in those days, I think Scott and myself had a certain path that the band was taking, and sometimes maybe some of the other guys didn't like see that or see that vision. That's not a bad thing at all. The one thing that I would never wanted to do back then was tell them whatever they thought was wrong or anything like that, because their involvement was really important. We were a band, but it had to start from somewhere, and everybody had to kind of just agree on it all. Like, okay, this is where we're going with this. Okay, that type of thing.
So, like, I was buying these records when they were out, but over the years, come to discover that Dan Spitz didn't play rhythms in the studio, and Kirk Hammett the same thing. But I'm surprised to see, like, in rehearsal, like I'm not clear on how much we're hearing the lead guitarist throughout an Anthrax song during the classic period. Is it just solos? Is it like the intro to Who Cares Wins? Would that be Dan? Are the harmony guitars him, like, that are playing?
Yeah, pretty much. I think Danny or myself would do the acoustic stuff. The intro to Who Cares Wins, that's Danny for sure. Danny was on the guitar intro EDI, which was on Among.
Right.
And SSC, that was Danny. That was his contribution to, he would have his pieces and stuff like that. But like I said, we were all present during rehearsal because I wanted it to be a band thing. You know what I mean? Like, okay, so here is the song. Let's learn these riffs and then put your taste on it. You know what I mean? That type of thing.
Right, but so just to be clear, but because I saw a lot of pictures of Danny in rehearsal, and so he would learn the riffs but not actually play them on the records. Is that how that went?
Scott did all the rhythms on those records. Like that was Scott's thing, and quite honestly, he didn't have the right hand that Scott had. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah, I mean that makes sense. It's just interesting that like he would be in there learning the riffs and then doing those parts. That always confused me a little bit. Just like, well, why not just have him come in and do solos? I mean, obviously you'd have to do it for the shows, but
right.
Okay,
right.
So basically on State of Euphoria, what Danny's is like the intro stuff, like to Who Cares Wins, and the solos. Are there any leads or harmony parts or anything that are going throughout the song that he would do?
If there was, then he would definitely do it.
So how did you go? So the rehearsal recordings we hear, obviously this is before Mark Dodson gets involved, but how did you go about selecting Mark Dodson as a producer after working with Eddie Kramer on Among the Living?
Mark was brought into us, brought to our attention, and Mark did some Judas Priest stuff, and I forgot the other thing he did, but we quite liked it, and we quite liked Mark a lot working with him. He had such a great vibe in the studio. He was just an instant team player, and just really liked him a lot. And everybody felt that way. And yeah, and we just locked in with him, and then that was it, you know.
What was the pre-production process like with him?
What do you mean the production?
The pre-production process, like with him, like when you first started talking to him before you even got to the studio to Quadridial, what did?
I remember Mark coming to New York and spending a week with us, listening to the songs, going over arrangements. Some of the vocals were done, meaning melodies and stuff like that, and we were going through that. So stuff like that, you know. We were open to his suggestions and stuff.
And how does the album bear his stamp? Like, what is his impact on it? I mean, because you did 2 records with him, this one and the next one. So
I think his mix was something that was has more of his stamp on it. The next one that he did, he didn't mix it; he recorded it and kind of helped produce it with us. But I could definitely hear Mark's mix. What he brought to it was definitely the mix.
All right, so I want to ask you about that because the mix on Among the Living is very dry, and that had been a bone of contention at first between the band and Eddie Kramer. Scott talks about it in his book where he has to pull Eddie Kramer aside and really take a stand and say, look, we want this dry, because the idea that Eddie had was reverb heavy and it was too mushy for you guys. So
well, that's not exactly how it went down.
Okay.
So I don't know if he in his book he basically takes that, but basically Eddie Kramer brought him and I into a room because we were unhappy with the mix that he did, and Eddie called it a 90s mix, and we were just like, absolutely not. That's not the way we want this record to sound. We want all that reverb gone. We wanted it to just sound like, not like a dry mix, you know, but we wanted it just not a lot of like. In other words, I think Eddie wanted to do like a kind of Def Leppard-y type of thing, and we did not want that at all. We wanted very dry, in your face, kind of hardcore, like punk meets metal. That's when you saw us live. That's what we wanted Among the Living to sound like.
Sure, you wanted it to sound immediate, and that's what is a lot of what defines that record. Is that it's like the band is very close to you as you're.
Well, yeah, because you know, some of the songs are very, very fast, and it's like with all that atmosphere that you put on it, it's like it definitely doesn't have the same type of aggression to it.
Right. So this is why what I'm setting this up for is because the mix on State of Euphoria is way more reverb heavy and way more distant.
Correct. And I think we were trying to split the difference. We wanted a little more slap back, a little more what Mark would call jizz, the vocals.
How would he spell that? Just kidding.
Yeah. So, and I think we were some of us were like okay, let's try it that way. It's not something that I hated.
But so Scott and you, and in the new liner notes, so there's various places where Scott has talked about this, and Alex Millis's notes, the new liner notes, where one of you guys is quoted as saying, it's in the mixing that you started to feel doubtful, that while you were making the record, while you were tracking it, you felt like you had another, monster classic or whatever. And then doubt started to creep in during the mixing. So where were you at with all that? Like what was the moment that you started to feel that way?
I started to think that we had about 75% of the record where I felt was strong, and then there was 25% of it that I felt could have been different, could have been worked on a little more. And that was basically it. I don't hate that record. I just wish we had a little more time to maybe make that 25%. For me, being the artist, I think I'm the most, hardest on it,
Right. And in all those notes from the fans that are included in the new sleeve or booklet, that totally illustrates how big the gap can be between an artist's impression of their own, what they made.
Absolutely. And that was the one thing that I didn't take into consideration, was that sometimes you could be so critical of your own art that you need to kind of shut your ears off. You need to shut your eyes off for a little bit, because people are totally seeing it and hearing it in a different way. Which after I went back and started putting this record together, this anniversary edition, I started to listen to it with different ears and started to appreciate it more, because I wasn't so close to it as I once was, so I kind of approached it from a totally different angle.
When was the last time you had sat through, how long had it been since you sat through and listened to the whole thing?
Oh, years.
I mean, are we talking almost 30 years?
No.
Okay.
No, not that long, but definitely a period where after it was out, I didn't listen to it that much. The only time I would listen to it is if we had to do a video for a song, and then I'd have to hear it 100 fucking times, when we would do a video.
Right.
But that being said, I spent a lot of time with it again when I was putting this together. Really started to go back to that time, and just think I was way too close to it back then. I was also very nervous about following up that Among record.
Right. So now, once the record is out, it's an interesting time because the success continues, the visibility continues. You got Antisocial on MTV doing well, from what I remember, and then you start to get a backlash, at least from the British press.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you start to feel pressure from that. So could you talk about how that impacted you? Because it sounds like that did a number on you personally.
It did, because we were we didn't know how to deal with rejection at that time, because for us, we were just kind of taking everything as it came. And this was now the first bit of, now our art was being kind of judged, and not that the other records weren't being judged, but this was kind of being more so kind of scrutinized, and the image of the band was also being included in the music, which was very strange to me. It's like, well, wait a minute, are you listening to us or are you watching us? And I must say, at that time, I felt that things started to get a little bit away from us. We were almost turning into a little parody of ourselves, and we definitely had to pull it back a bit. I remember some nights before we would go on, Spitz would have this shirt on, and one of us would say to him, dude, you can't wear that out there, you know?
What was his shirt?
It is a big fucking Tweety bird, and I remember Scott in particular, like, dude, you're not wearing that out there.
How did that go over?
It was uncomfortable, you know?
Actually, I vaguely recall pictures of him with that shirt on, or a video or something. Maybe there's a video. Okay, yes. And the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles thing.
Well, the Turtles were one thing, because we were fans of the Turtles. They were violent fucking things, and the Eastman and Laird comic was fucking killer at the time. And I probably told him, put that on your guitar. Yeah, you know? So, like I said, we were just living life like we were living our own life. So we were just being portrayed and splattered all over, you know, magazines and stuff. But like I said, I think it started to get away from us for a bit.
Right. I mean, it's like your guard was down. You know, you can't really blame people because you guys were in shorts and like skateboarding. You know, at least you and Scott were.
Companies were throwing shit at us to wear. You know, that's another thing. We would get boxes of shit. And, you know, some guys would have a deal with this company and they would wear it on stage and the company would be happy. But then we started not to be happy. Like, we got to stop doing this. It's not cool.
Right. Because at first you think, oh, this is great. Right. But then it's like, it becomes an extra burden on, it's like you're not just going out on stage wearing what you're wearing. There's this calculation to it, right? So it sounds like that kind of can corrupt a band from within your own.
Well, because it set us apart from other bands at the time. That's another thing. But it also took it away from where we started out to be, in just black t-shirts. You know what I mean?
Right.
We were a metal band, and we started to kind of dress it up a little bit here and there. But then I felt by State of Euphoria, it was a bit out of hand.
So you've hinted at this before. I saw an interview on Loudwire about Persistence of Time, and you reference coming off of State of Euphoria and the backlash and everything, and you talk about how it becomes harder to hold a band together. So how else did success affect Anthrax and make things difficult? Because by State of Euphoria, now you're in the thick of the success part.
Oh shit, yeah. I mean, we are successfully going out and doing, you know, 2 nights at the Felt Forum in Madison Square Garden. We're doing successful touring, and so it's starting to happen in a bigger way now. So that's where we were, and I just think that as far as that goes, yeah, everything was going great. But I don't think, you know, I definitely think we wanted to make the next record, we wanted to make it a lot darker and heavier. That's where we were going.
Right, and that is very apparent when you compare the 2 records. I mean, it was very apparent from the first few seconds of the next record. I bought it the day it came out, and it's like night and day, you know. And it's I think when you talk about splitting the difference, I think you got it on that record. It's very atmospheric, but it's also very immediate and very heavy and very, you know, it's in between where Among would be and State of Euphoria in terms of sonically the reverb and the dimension of it, you know.
Right. I think if we followed up Among the Living with that record, we would be happier, musically speaking. I mean.
So how did the whole experience of feeling like some of State of Euphoria was a little underdeveloped, how did that affect the way you prepared and game planned for being ready to record the next record?
Well, we set a lot of time aside for it, you understand, because we were under so much pressure. Like when that fucking Among the Living tour finally ended, we didn't have much long to get back into, you know, rehearsal, studio, boom, boom, boom. We had another fucking run of shows the following summer that was already booked.
Right.
And we couldn't blow that. That's the thing. We had to meet that deadline. Unfortunately, things didn't go smoothly in the studio, and things took a little longer. But the problem was I wish we would have held it back a little bit and not release the record, and then maybe go back in and maybe spend another 2 weeks to 3 weeks on it, and maybe things would have been a little different. I don't know.
But then that would have delayed it to '89, probably, right? That would have like
correct.
So it wasn't entirely, because I read something recently where it was like there was pressure from the record company, but it also sounds like the band chose, because to hear Scott tell it, it's like, you know, you guys had chosen to do those shows and you did not want to renege on that, or you didn't want to miss out on that opportunity. So it wasn't just like a shotgun marriage.
No, these were big Monsters of Rock shows in Europe that we could not cancel those.
Right.
These were kind of shows that you don't pull out of, you don't cancel. You know what I mean?
Right, and you wouldn't have wanted to either, because the bill was something you wanted to.
It was tremendous. It was it was an amazing bill that we wanted to be a part of that company. You know.
So you decided to work with Mark Dodson again for Persistence of Time. What did you like? How did you sit down with him, and then what did you set out to do differently, other than just like the tone of the record and the overall vibe? But I'm talking about the way you approached recording. I mean, how much discussion was there? Like, okay, we want to.
It was a total different approach. It was, a more thorough approach. We weren't just going to say, okay, that's good. No. We kind of did our homework more about how we wanted it to go, both sonically. I remember I didn't care if the song was fucking 8 minutes. If the song wants to be 8 minutes, let the song be 8 minutes. Let's not crunch it down to, it was that type of vibe.
Right. The first 3 songs are 7 minutes apiece.
Correct. They that's it. They just wanted to be that long and didn't really want to kind of crunch them down. We just wanted to let them be. Plus, there was a lot of that going on around that time too. You know what I mean?
You mean like proggy kind of chops?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the bands that like especially us, Metallica, even Slayer were, I mean, I know Rain and Blood is short, but like some of their songs on like even Hell Awaits are pretty long. But like Metallica, on Justice, they had some long ass songs too.
Yeah, for sure. And Megadeth also. It's like it started off really raw with Kill 'Em All, Bonded by Blood, or going in order: Kill 'Em All, Fistful of Metal, Killing Is My Business, Bonded by Blood, and then Show No Mercy. Also, everything's raw and street level, and then the bands start to get more technical. And by 88, 90, it's like prog rock meets metal for a lot of those bands.
Yeah, and it wasn't even it was just something that, like I said, if the song wanted to be long, just let the song be that song. Don't try and crunch it down because people are dancing to a 3-minute song by us. It's like, just let it be,
Well, I mean, I think the songs we're talking about on the next record, on Persistence of Time, it's kind of like when people see a really long movie and they go, oh, that didn't feel as long as what?
Exactly. Exactly.
So
it blew by, you know what I mean?
Right.
It didn't really feel like it took a lot out of me, but the song just flowed. And that's what I mean when I say if the song wants to be that long, then let the song be that long. Unless it's like, why are we going back to that riff again? We just did it like 100 times, Didn't feel like that.
So on State of Euphoria, how much did you do things with that in mind, like trying to keep things truncated or concise?
Oh, I think that went into. I think there was a lot of talk about that. Cutting it down a bit,
Mm-hmm. So why Antisocial? I know you were a fan, and I think from what I
love the song. Just they were one of my favorite bands before even being in the band. I love that band. They were like, to me, a punk version of like AC/DC with a fucking awesome guitar player.
And you got into him through the heavy metal film soundtrack, right?
I got into him through them, and then I would see Iron Maiden. I remember the drummer from Iron Maiden, Clive Burr, had this trust patch on his jacket, and I was so intrigued by that. And they were also on the heavy metal soundtrack. And I went down to Bleecker Bob's in New York and bought the first Trust album. And it was in French, and I didn't give a shit. It was just fucking awesome.
And so, why 2 Trust covers?
Couldn't decide which one to put on the record. Because originally we were going to do both of those, and after Antisocial, Sex was going to come right in, like Heartbreaker, Living, Loving, Made. It just kind of goes into the other one, but it didn't go on the record. It ended up going on a B-side.
Wow, that would have been really interesting. Actually, that changes the whole. Not to hindsight or second guess, but that actually would have changed the whole complexion of the record. Now that makes I'm going to arrange it in my iTunes like that.
Right.
That actually would because that the other Le Sex is a real. It's like a more ripping thrash.
Totally. I mean, we kicked it up a notch from when they do it, but it definitely has a kind of thrashy, punk rocky feel to it, and but so that's the way it was going to go, but it didn't go that way.
How much did you consider putting it like that for the new version?
I didn't want it to, because then the purist would have been like, why did you ruin the flow of the original record, you know?
Right.
So I didn't even bother with that, you know?
So now Trust did music in English and
yeah. After their second album, they would do a version in English. And it's funny because the guy who was the singer for this band, Sham 69, he did the lyrics. Okay.
You mean, he translated for them, you're saying?
Correct.
For them to sing it in English, because then you guys went and did a French version of Antisocial.
Correct.
But that did not have to be translated for you. That was already there.
Well, Joey had to do it. He had to sing it in French, but he did it more phonetically.
Right. You can kind of tell from the...
yeah.
And it sounds like it's very punched in, line by line kind of thing. So I know that Parasite was in the set list in 91, but what are the chances fans can see one of these deep cuts from State of Euphoria? I'm not even talking about the B-side stuff. I'm talking about deep cuts from the actual record, make it into the set at this point, like for your next Slayer leg or whatever.
We were trying to do Now It's Dark. I really wanted to reintroduce that song into the set and play it with new blood, new fire. And let's just say someone didn't learn it.
Okay. I hope you're not talking about Joey, but all right. Well, are you talking about vocals or musician? I mean,
I'll leave it up to you to decide.
Oh, that's a drag. That's a shame. How often does that happen? Like with other people?
Quite a lot.
I'm just talking about in general in the band with other people. Like
happens quite a bit.
All right, so it's not just one. That's not like just coming from one person. Is what I'm getting at.
No, nope. It happens quite a bit in other bands too. Somebody doesn't want to learn the song. Somebody doesn't feel like playing that song, and then the song just doesn't get played.
But I mean, just because I know things have been touchy there over the years at times, and it would just be, I think, comfort to people who like the band and follow the band to know that it's not just falling on one person who's holding the bus up sometimes.
I'll tell you this much: the band nowadays is way different than it was back in the day, the band completely, gets along way better now than it did back in that period.
Where was the rub back in that period?
I think it was. I honestly think a lot has to do with a bit of ignorance, arrogance, experience, too many people around you saying yes, yes, and I think that for the most part, when you're young, you have this bit of arrogance to you that, we could do whatever we want type of vibe, and you don't really think too much about it. Once you get older, you start to have a different take on things, and you definitely appreciate things for what they are. And let's just say a decision you would have made 20, 30 years ago, you may not make that same decision.
But when you have something like this, though, you got this reissue package coming out, you haven't played a song like Now It's Dark in a long time, and somebody doesn't learn it, and you're thinking, well, I mean, what does it take to go learn one of our old songs? How much resentment does that cause right there? I mean, say it's something, I don't know.
It doesn't cause any resentment. It doesn't get there. It's just like, okay, all right, no problem. It just rolls off. It doesn't fester,
But I mean, you have had other deep cuts like Skeletons in the Closet bubble up here and there. So,
right, it's possible, it's doable. But I mean, I really want to play, Now It's Dark or the song Finally. I would like to reintroduce these into the set at some point. So I'm not saying it won't happen. Maybe we can, play it when we're in Europe.
Yeah, to be honest, just a side note, I saw the band open for Slayer, or on the whole Slayer thing recently, last month, and Joey said, "Here's a song for State of Euphoria," and I was hoping to hear it. Now It's Dark. So,
so was I.
But so who is that doing the Gene Simmons impersonation at the beginning of Parasite?
I think it's the nephew, but Gene was there when we were tracking it. He came down to Electric Lady and hung out throughout the whole thing, and I'll never forget that night as long as I live. It was just magical. He just came down, hang out, played ping pong a lot, and listened to the track and did this, did that, and it was just one of those magical evenings.
Just, you mean from him being his presence there?
Absolutely. Because we had done the tour already, the Crazy Nights tour, so we became friendly with him. And he always, he would always show up for things, and he's always been, just a great thing.
So we were talking before about how the fans were writing in. When did you put that call out? And was that on Instagram? Because a lot of those messages are really long.
It was on Instagram and Twitter.
Okay.
And then it just, bam, it just hit like crazy, and couldn't put all of them, but I tried to put, enough. I couldn't put everybody's on there because that would be impossible. But, I went through like a ton of them, and I wanted to hit on things that, what the record meant to them, how, if it got them through a bad time, a good time, whatever, just what it meant to you. That's all. Because I could tell Paul McCartney what the White Album meant to me, and that was the first record I ever bought with my own money, and I could tell him all that stuff. So when people tell me these things, I totally eat it up, because I appreciate it, and I know exactly where they're coming from.
Yeah, well, how do you feel about the White Album?
Oh, I love it. I can't wait till this 50th anniversary comes out November 9th, and I'm a huge Beatles fan since I was a little kid. And like I said, that was the first record I bought with my own money. My mother took me to Woolworths, and that was it. I came home and I was absorbed in the White Album.
You know what's I don't know if you know this story already, but Chris Cornell said that he spent a year in the house where he didn't leave the house as a kid, like had some depression, agoraphobia issues going on there, and he had somehow inherited a crate of Beatles records. I think he was like 12 years old, 14 years old, something like that. And that's all he did that whole year is listen to Beatles music. And he didn't know that there were different singers in the band. He wasn't like at that stage where you can pick apart what people are doing. It was just all one,
yeah.
solid, which is a really amazing when you can think back to that age. I mean, I think we've all had that, right? Where it just feels like one blur of stuff and it really gets to you, right? Because you're not thinking about it.
Absolutely.
And so that is just an interesting take because I'd never thought of the Beatles. I could never conceive of hearing the Beatles without knowing that there's different people, but there's sometimes it's hard to tell who's singing.
Well, I mean, the Beatles. The thing about the Beatles is like it's so well documented. John, Paul, George, Ringo. That I find it a little hard that Chris was too young to understand who it was, but before, who knows? I don't know what happened.
So, I mean, could you talk about? So that's the first record you bought with your own money. Your mom took you to Woolworth, then you brought it home. You listened to it.
It was birthday money.
And so, can you talk about the experience of how old were you?
Oh shit, man! I don't even remember how old I was when I bought that.
Preteen.
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
Oh, definitely. Probably, I must have been maybe 7, 8 years old.
Okay. All right.
Like that.
And so, how do you feel listening to that record today? Like,
well, okay, so let me back it up a bit.
Yeah.
I have 4 older sisters, so I would inherit all their Beatles albums, but this was mine. I bought this one with my own money, so this one was way more special to me because she took me to get it. It was also a double record.
Right.
There was photos in it. There was a huge poster in there. And I just remember my favorite song was Birthday. And it just happened to be because it was my birthday that I bought the record. That was the birthday money. But that was the song that I played over and over again because it was the most upbeat. And for a kid, it's like, it's a simple song. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But it's birthday. You know what I mean? It's like the Beatles' birthday song. So I loved it. I remember immediately learning it on the drums, and it was just that stuff. And I didn't quite get into the deeper cuts until later on.
So it took a while for you to digest wrap your head around the whole thing.
Oh, absolutely. Because I would put one side on, and then. Then you'd have to get up and turn the other side over. And like I said, it was just those songs like Back in the USSR, Obla Di, Obla Da. These were like the songs that immediately hit me. You know what I mean?
Sure. And then some of the stuff took longer, but it worked. It sunk in after a while. I mean, it's a challenging record. It's got a lot of those catchy moments, but it's very...
Oh, it's very deep, that record. I mean, it's like for an adult listening to that record with adult ears compared to listening to it with kids' ears is a completely different record. You have such heavy shit like Julia, which is about his mother. And back then, I would have never comprehended that. You know what I mean?
Right. His mom got run over, right? Basically?
Yeah. So... and then there's different songs, Piggies, for instance. All the McCartney songs, to me, were the ones that I would immediately love. You know what I mean? Rocky Raccoon, it was just, it's just an awesome record, you know what I mean? And it's like, for me, when all those bands started to come out of Seattle, I would say, wow, they must have listened to the White Album.
Oh, how so? You aside from the vocal harmonies, what else Like,
I just think it was very stripped down and very grungy sounding, that record. It wasn't polished like Pepper. It had a very stripped down black and white feel to it, you know?
Huh. So there's got to be examples like what you, like, you know, like everything you guys are talking about with State of Euphoria. And it's interesting that, you know, you're taking the approach of just being straight up about it, about how you feel about the record, and still saying, here's the 30th anniversary, you know, here's the 30th anniversary edition. We weren't crazy about how this turned out, but the fan aspect of it is a really nice touch. It kind of balances out.
I think it adds to the whole piece as a whole. Seeing where it started, and how it came to fruition, you know what I mean? Even everything down to the album cover. You know, there's a ongoing theme with those first couple of records. Among the Living was a total, you know, departure from. I tried to continue with the guy who is getting his teeth blown out on the first cover, which I had nothing to do with. That guy is he looks a little like the same guy that's on this, Spreading the Disease, and then he kind of looks like the same guy that's on State of Euphoria.
Right. The guy on the cover of State of Euphoria looks like if somebody was related to Frank and Joey.
It's their brother.
Right. Or you know, somehow, you know, they had a kid. That's what the guy on the cover would look like. You've talked about the cover and what you were going for, and even with the cover, it didn't quite hit what you were.
No, it didn't quite. Wasn't exactly what I felt in my head, but we used up all the money on that and the back cover.
What do you mean you used up all the money?
Well, we had a certain budget for album art, and I used it up for the front and back cover for that.
Okay.
And the Mort Drucker.
Mort Drucker, right.
Which came out perfect.
Right, and then...
Yeah, except for the fact that the Knot Man that he used was his version, like a kind of a big, goofy, you know, version of the Knot Man. And he, for some reason, I don't know why he did this, but if you look at the way his hands are going, he painted his hand in like the bricks. Like
yeah.
He did, and I never understood why he did that or why he never corrected it.
Yeah, it's fading into the bricks. Yeah, I actually do remember that. I hadn't thought about that in a long time.
Yeah,
but
it's always something that really, really bothered me.
Right, because it's like it looks unfinished. Well, I mean, maybe there's something.
So there is something to be said about the art and some of the music. So maybe it's not all finished.
Right. Wow, I hadn't thought about that in a long time. I mean, they haven't sent me the physical copy yet, but they did send me the liner notes, and I do remember what it looks like. And I mean, the Mort Drucker thing, that's also what contributed to people, you know,
goofy.
Right.
It started to become this kind of goofy take on it. But they didn't understand that Mad Magazine was something that, man, that was me growing up. Mad Magazine was it for me. That's what I fucking read like every month. And the artwork and the artists that were in Mad were artists that I completely worshipped. And Mort Drucker was that guy, you know?
But I mean, you can see where people were going to latch on to the image because the band's image was so different and so just sort of jovial and like, you know, appearance-wise, was just sort of like approachable, right? That I could see where the band felt like people were latching onto that too much, but I could also see where people misunderstood because you guys were kind of drawing attention to that too at the same time.
Yeah.
How much did you ever consider asking Mort to try to do it as a Mad Fold-In?
I think there was, I don't remember him actually. I only had like maybe one or two conversations with him. And I don't think there was any talk about that.
Well, for the 50th anniversary, you could do one that folds into a Tweety Bird t-shirt.
Oh yeah, that would be awesome.
So before I let you go, there's got to be examples of like what we're talking about, where you've seen the fan response, or people are like, man, this record meant so much to me, and you don't quite see it that way. There's got to be things where you've felt the same way about somebody else's work, and then you come to find out, I hate that song, or that record's, whatever, that kind of thing. Can you think of any examples off the top of your head?
Well, that's a good one. I think you may have stumped me.
I mean, I know it just happens to any fan of music where you like read a quote or something, you're like, what? They don't know what they're talking about. Like, this record is amazing, right? Where it reaches you, and then you hear somebody say something dismissive about it. You're like, well, that's good thing they didn't have their way, at like not putting it out or taking a song off a record that you love, that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, I mean, if I kind of start to think about it more, I'm sure there's something. I remember reading something about Boston. Something almost didn't make the record, and I don't remember what it was, but to me that first Boston album is flawless.
Sure. Yeah, there's so many things like that, and when you connect to the music, like, thank God that person didn't get their way, because they can't even tell how amazing this song is,
Oh, you know what? You just reminded me of something. A few years back, the Beatles released "Let It Be Naked."
Yes.
And being a Beatle fan, I used to have bootlegs of old Beatle, other Beatle things, and that was a version that I had. Was a version, just a stripped down version, but the quality was terrible. So when I heard that version of it, I was fucking floored because it sounded amazing. And so that was before Phil Spector.
Yes, added all the strings and stuff.
Yeah, I hated it. That's my least favorite Beatle record. As a matter of fact, I get into arguments with people about that record because I don't listen to it at all. I just didn't like it. It was the end, and it wasn't the last record that they recorded.
Right.
But to me, it's the last thing, because Abbey Road is so fucking far away from Let It Be.
Right. You can, and it feels like the last record. It feels like things are falling apart, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
And I was always surprised when I found that out, like that. Wait a minute, this is not the last thing they did, because it sounds like a band that's like running on fumes. I actually love it, but for whatever that's worth. But it definitely sounds like things are coming apart. And that was Paul McCartney's decision to go with Spector, if I remember correctly. And
no, he didn't want to go with Spector. He was the one that fought it.
Okay.
It was the other guys. John wanted.
Oh, okay, right. Duh, because John worked with Phil Spector later in his solo career. That's right. Paul McCartney hated it. So did Andy Johns or Glyn Johns. I think it's Glyn Johns.
Yeah, and George Martin hated it.
Right. Because
that's when George said, I'll do another record with you guys, but it's got to be the way we do it. You know what I mean?
Right. And Glyn Johns, when Let It Be Naked came out, he said, finally you get to hear the version that Phil Spector didn't puke all over. That's what I remember reading.
Yeah, I hated it, dude. I didn't like that album at all. I hated The Long and Winding Road. I hated a lot of the stuff on that record. I loved Two of Us, Dig a Pony, but and Let It Be, of course, is good, but
So you're more of a Paul McCartney leaning fan, if I'm hearing you right?
On some albums I am, but there's other records that I'm a George Harrison fan, or I'm a John fan, so I just love the Beatles. I couldn't say I would narrow it down to, name one crappy McCartney song.
I mean, it's pretty mind-boggling to think that their recorded body of work is basically over the course of 6 years. I mean,
8.
Okay, that's still.
It's such an achievement. That's
astounding. It's like it blows your mind that. I mean, right? I'm thinking of the compilation, the famous compilation where they're on the stairs, 60 to 60. So it goes from 60 to 60. So anyway,
The Red and Blue album.
Right. And that's why I always thought it was 6 years. But I mean, still, I know they were around longer before that, and they were gigging like crazy, hours and hours and hours and hours a day, 11 gigs a day at sometimes, right? So they lived, even before they recorded anything, they lived gigging-wise like 3 times as much as a band would,
Oh, yeah, man.
But
they lived, breathed each other for like so long. And then, those guys would spend hours upon hours in the studio. And, there's something to be said about having to meet a deadline. And some of the most creative things come out when you're under time constraints,
Sure.
That can work for us, but yeah,
I mean, it's just wild to think that much work came in such a compressed time period, and things moved slower back then, and yet bands would put out, multiple records a year.
Every 6 months. Every fucking 6 months there would be a record,
So before I let you go, you were, from 88 to 93, you were really open in the press about your love for David Lynch's work, particularly Twin Peaks, and Now It's Dark is Blue Velvet, inspired by Blue Velvet.
Yes.
Could you talk about how David Lynch's work, how much it's held up for you, like what it's meant to you?
I was so excited when he announced that he's going to do this new Twin Peaks on Showtime. I was like, yes. So there I was, ready to watch it, and I loved the first episode. I thought it was like, wow, totally back there. I'm totally back in Twin Peaks world. Watch the next episode. Okay, all right. And then he lost me. I just don't know what happened, But nothing will touch that first season of Twin Peaks. Just the excitement. Man, he just set the tone, And same with Blue Velvet. That movie is fucking heavy.
Well, and, I'm trying to go back to when that was on TV. Now, it was on later. It wasn't on primetime. I think it would start at 10 o'clock, I think.
Twin Peaks, I think it was on ABC, and I believe it was on Wednesday nights at 10 o'clock.
Right. So, but just to have something like that get on TV, to me, blows my mind that even happened.
Oh, yeah. Way ahead of its time. I'm surprised that, this was before, we're talking before HBO and all that other stuff. So, yeah, you would have to put it on at 9 or 10 o'clock,
So could you talk about the impact when you saw that first season? Like, what kind of impact did that have? Like, take me back to your response to
which show? To Twin Peaks or Blue Velvet?
Yeah, Twin Peaks. Well, both, actually. Because Blue Velvet had already been out.
Well, the thing about Twin Peaks is it was immediate that I completely just loved it. That first 2-hour movie that was on, hooked me in because there was an element of eeriness to it, of course. There was an element of quirkiness to it. There was an element of, like, comedy. But the tone was just very dark. You didn't know where this was going. And I was totally intrigued by it. I was such a big Twin Peaks fan that I would make sure that we had a day off up in Seattle so that and Scott too, we would go up to Snoqualmie where they filmed and just go there and just get lost in the whole fucking look and the vibe and landmarks. Here's where they filmed this. We would go to the diner to have a piece of pie. We were totally nerds.
That's really funny. You guys were like that about a lot of stuff. That's another thing that I think separated Anthrax a little bit. You guys were unabashed fans, and that would work its way into the music, I think, much more so than the other thrash bands. You wore the sort of whole catalog of things you enjoyed on your sleeve and in the songs.
Oh yeah, man. That's the thing about it. I wanted to let people know, like, oh, you're going to love this. And that's the same thing with, like, bands. I just wanted to expose bands to more ears, like, please don't miss out on this. This is fucking awesome, you know? It's the same thing with movies and TV shows and even comics. Just wanted people exposed to it, you know?
I mean, you felt that way about Jane's Addiction too, correct?
Loved Jane's Addiction, man. It's like I saw them in a little fucking place and completely just blew me away.
Yeah, that's I consider that one of music's biggest tragedies. They never followed up that third record.
Oh, dude, their first three records, their first album, you know, was good, but then nothing shocking to me was, I just took it. It was next level, and that's still my favorite. I would say Nothing Shocking is still my favorite. Ritual is great, and that became very commercially, you know, accepted and put them way high on the map. But I still go for Nothing Shocking.
Right, which is also in its 30th anniversary this year as well. So you're doing a Chester Bennington benefit event with Gary Holt in October, and my editor wanted to ask you about what you guys have planned for that.
We're still discussing it right now, and it's a mental health benefit. And I know, you know, we're going to try and, you know, raise awareness, raise money, of course, but you know, mental illness is definitely, it's identified now as something that maybe years ago was not looked at as closely, and is it's severe. Like the amount of people who have it, and you're shocked to hear, wow, I never knew that. You know what I mean? And there's just a lot of people out there who need help when it comes to this type of thing. And I want to offer my help.
How much have you seen this firsthand or over the years? You know, you said there's a lot out there. How much have you?
Well, I never knew back in the day. Like, I remember Chris Rock making a joke about whatever happened to Crazy. You know, he's just crazy. You know, and that's what you thought. You know, there was people who you know, abused drugs, abused alcohol, but they probably had other issues going on, and they were just kind of numbing it with that, you know?
Sure.
But nobody ever diagnosed, you know, never really saw that. Now we see it from a different point of view. And it's like, oh, shit. Yeah, man.
Sure. And even for Who Cares Wins, the homelessness issue, you know, it touches on that a little bit in the video, like indirectly talking about how many of them are veterans. And
oh, absolutely, man. It's like there's a lot of, like, you know, our country is fucking awesome, but our country has problems too. And, you know, it's so torn apart nowadays with this side and the other side. And I feel like the people who are getting screwed are all of us, really, because you split up people, you divide them, and then shit doesn't get done.
Right.
And it's getting worse. It's not getting better. I was watching shit today, and it's just the same crap. I saw today Trump got laughed at. And it takes me back to when he would say, they're laughing at us all over the world. And then today they actually laughed at him. And I was just like, holy shit, you know? Because he tried to brag. The first thing he did was kind of brag, and then people just called him on it, you know what I mean? And just kind of laughed.
Right, right. How much are you seeing that at shows, like the vibe of people being divided? How much are you feeling that in the crowd? Because, I mean,
I'm not seeing it in the crowd at all. I'm seeing it online because people hide behind their computers and stuff, and they talk shit. And a lot of people don't want musicians, anyone in the entertainment world, they don't want them to have an opinion on anything, which I think is ridiculous because we're just the same. We fucking see things, we disagree with things, we applaud things, we pay taxes, we send our kids to school, we do the same fucking thing. So if I have an opinion on something and I want people to maybe see a different side here, well then don't tell me to shut up and play your drums. Because I hear that a lot, and it
fucking pisses me off.
You hear that a lot online, you're saying?
Yeah. That's why I don't say anything online anymore.
Wow, so it's like athletes. I didn't realize that was as much of an issue with musicians as it is, because, I mean, obviously with athletes, that's a big thing, shut up and play, right? But, and this is presumably sometimes from fans who love the music, but they don't agree with you, and they don't want to hear you weigh in on whatever, right?
Right, even if I'm 100% correct.
But you're not feeling that tension at the actual, when the crowds are...
No, I'm not. No. I don't feel that at all. I feel we're all together there for the love of music and just, the right reasons. We're not at a fucking rally, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. What was the response to the video for Who Cares Wins?
It was kind of bittersweet because we were so happy that we were doing it, but then they decided to play the Phil Collins version of the video instead.
Meaning, you're talking about the one with the performance version?
No, I meant that he came out the same type of video called Another Day in Paradise.
Oh.
And they fucking chose that one over ours.
Okay. Yeah. So that obviously overshadowed. But for people who knew who you were, I mean, I would imagine that message really resonated for a band to come out and then list some statistics.
It did. Yeah. I mean, it was a good thing, but if it helped a few people, awesome. You know what I mean? It's like I feel like that's the takeaway. If it helped a few people, then great.
Because I mean, what you were talking about with mental illness, I grew up in the Bronx too, and it was very customary. Just the way you were raised growing up in the city, you just completely tuned out homeless people. You wouldn't. Somebody approached you for money, whatever, you just keep walking. Like, at least that's the way I was raised. And, you would hear all the time, well, if they should get out there and work and stuff like that. And you didn't realize a lot of these people are veterans or kids. I mean, I still wouldn't stop for somebody asking me for money, but I mean, I still think there's something important to having the survival instinct to not be approached and not be taken for a sucker, right? But
exactly. I mean, it's a hard thing to do, not to help people. I mean, I do it a lot. If I see a mom with a little baby or something in the street, I have to give them something.
The carpal tunnel situation for you flared up this past summer, right? A little bit?
If I'm out there for a long period of time, I need a few days to rest my hand, and that's the way it's going to go. People shouldn't be so shocked. I'm just sorry that it may hit during a show that you're coming to, but it's like athletes, you know what I mean? They got to sit a game out, and for me, it's like this is what I have to do at this stage of my career.
So now it sounds like the band can kind of anticipate, or at least have a backup plan in place.
Correct. We know this. We know where it's going to be. Like, okay, I got to rest it at this point.
Okay, so this time with Gene Hoglan, it wasn't like a thing, because I thought when I heard the news, I was like, oh my God.
No.
The day before, hey, can you do the show tomorrow?
No. Gene knew he was going to do this batch of shows. Usually John Deddy would come in, but Gene was out there on the tour, and Gene said, hey, I would love to do this for you guys. And I'm already out here. I know the set. I know, so we're like, okay, great. That's how that happened.
All right, good to know. Thanks for, they told me I would have 25 minutes, so.
I think we talked for 2 hours.
Hey, Saby here. Thanks for checking out my interview with Charlie Benante of Anthrax. In case you didn't notice, this interview was conducted in September of 2018, right before the release of the 30th anniversary deluxe reissue of State of Euphoria. I was actually at one of those Felt Forum shows that he mentions. Anthrax did a 2-night homestand at the Felt Forum. It's now called something else, but it was the smaller arena adjacent to Madison Square Garden. It's in the same building, actually. They played there in 1989 on May 5th and 6th. That was their Headbangers Ball outing, where Anthrax headlined with Exodus and Halloween in support. You heard Charlie and I talking about Jane's Addiction as well. The third Jane's Addiction album, Ritual to Habitual, was actually released on the same day as Persistence of Time. They were both released August 21st, 1990. I know this because I left home to start my freshman year of college on August 27th or 28th. I can't remember exactly what day it was, but it was like, about a week later. And both of those albums remain hugely pivotal in my development as a music listener and just in my life in general. I mean, the Jane's Addiction album is my favorite album of all time. And the Anthrax album is equally meaningful to me. And wow, what a time in your life to have music fusing to your memories, right? Let's see, what else? I wish I had pushed him a little further when he said, it was a combination of ignorance, arrogance, et cetera, et cetera. And I wish I had honed in on each of those words that he chose. Like, how was it ignorant? In what way? Who was being ignorant and in what way? To see what he meant by that. I mean, the arrogance part, I get it. He kind of fleshed that out a little bit later. I also wish I had pushed a little more when he said, you have this person who's dropped into this band of brothers and you realize this is how this person was raised. I mean, he had to be talking about Joey there because the only other person to have joined at that point would have been Frank Bello, but Frank Bello joined before that. So, I mean, that it's pretty obvious there. I wish I had asked him for other examples. Like, can you give me an example of someone else who didn't want to do a song and add it to the set list? Because my thing on listening back to this was like, man, why can't you just pull rank and be like, look, this is your job. Like, you're in this band. This is what we do. Part of your job is to learn songs sometimes that we want to do. Or even be like, hey, if you've got a song you want the rest of us to do, let's do a fair trade kind of a thing, right? Where, the band isn't just asking the one individual to do something. It's like you're offering something as well. Hey, you do this and we'll do this. I did see Anthrax on that Slayer farewell run in 2018. I saw that whole show at Darien Lake in New York, which is between Rochester and Buffalo. And I have to say, as soon as Anthrax walked out, I was pumped. Just watching them walk on the stage, I was suddenly very, very just excited. And it was the most predictable set list I could possibly imagine. And yet, I absolutely loved the show. I almost cried. Actually, I got choked up. I was realizing hit during the show with how much this band means to me, and decided that I wouldn't see them again after that. Because it's well, you can only go down from there, from that sensation, right? I don't like to go to the well too many times with bands, and will often choose to sit out when they come back around, just because I don't want... I want to leave my memories on the highest possible note. And if I happen to see a show that hits that highest note, I'm let me not tempt fate here. I'm really, really, really grateful that I caught a show where Charlie was actually playing. I mean, he played most of those dates, but I would have been supremely bummed out had I caught them and he hadn't been, the one behind the kit. I mean, you just can't really do Anthrax without Scott and Charlie. You just can't. Even Frank, I would say, as well. And actually, for me, Joey and also Dan Spitz as well. I mean, Dan Spitz is one of my favorite lead guitar players ever. And I absolutely feel like something is missing since his departure. I know Scott Ian in his book says, oh yeah, it was easy to replace him. It was no, whatever. I just don't. I'm 180 degrees opposite of that. I think he had an incredible signature style and just played solos that just worked for the song, but also elevated the song in a way that totally, totally lights me up. And let's see, is there anything else that on listening back, I was feeling oh man, that would have been a great opportunity to press a little bit more. Definitely his relationship with Frank Bello. There's a DVD with the John Bush, Rob Caggiano lineup where they're doing a photo shoot and Frank is just incensed. He's really, 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 really angry and being really, really difficult during this photo shoot. You can just tell he's just boiling over and the other guys are just kind of quietly tolerating it. And they chose to include that in the DVD, which I thought was strange at the time. And it would have been cool to touch on that relationship. I feel like those guys have somewhat of a contentious thing going. I mean, they're family, they're blood relatives, and their difference in age is so small that they're like brothers, but Charlie is actually Frank's uncle. And Charlie plays far more of a dominant role. I mean, is basically the creative heartbeat of the band. And I had a memory of another interview I did with Charlie where he was like, whoa, 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 I'm the one who that all comes from me, where I brought Frank up for some reason. I mean, I guess the relationship with Scott Ian too, because Scott in his book talks about how he drew money from the band's expense account with like the band's credit card, and Charlie called him up and said that can't happen. And that would be interesting to see. I feel like those guys close ranks, like the two of them, and if there's any friction between them, we don't really get to see it in the public. But I mean, it would be cool to know just as fans, right? That's about it. I have a lot more Anthrax content, a lot of thrash stuff spanning a couple of decades at this point. So if you're into bands like Anthrax, Metallica, etc., or just a fan of music, I urge you to subscribe, hit the notification button for whenever I post this stuff from my archive and new stuff as well. But I have a humongous archive of interviews that I'm steadily getting up online. I've got interviews with other Anthrax members, so if you like what I'm laying down, hit the like, subscribe, and notification button so you won't miss a new upload. And other than that, for FeedbackDef, I am Saby Reyes-Kulkarni, the apostate music journalist. Thanks for hanging with me. Over and out.